The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm as Donovan Sterling struggled to open his eyes for the first time in 8 months. The fluorescent light of his Massachusetts General Hospital room in Boston penetrated his pupils like needles, making him blink repeatedly. His muscles, atrophied from the long period of inactivity, protested when he tried to move. The first image he could make out through his blurry vision was the couple hugging each other near the window. The woman had wavy brown hair falling over her shoulders, wearing a navy blue dress that he would recognize anywhere. It was Avery's favorite. His heart raced when he saw her in the arms of Mitchell Harrison, his best friend and business partner for 15 years. Avery. His voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. The couple broke up abruptly, and Donovan could see the shock on their faces. "Oh my God, he's awake!" Avery exclaimed, running towards the door. "I need to call the nurse." Mitchell remained frozen, his normally confident face now a mask of guilt and worry. "Don, you're back." Donovan tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't respond properly. The last memory he had was of the dinner celebrating his 5th wedding anniversary with Avery. They were on the porch of their mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, drinking champagne and making plans for a trip to Tuscany. Medical staff burst into the room, led by Dr. Rebecca Chen, who immediately began performing a series of neurological tests. "Mr. Sterling, do you know what day it is?" "It's June 15th, 2021, he replied with certainty. The silence that followed was deafening. "Don," Avery stepped forward, her voice shaking. "We are in February 2024. Donovan's world began to spin. 3 years. Had he wasted 3 years of his life? Her gaze wandered from Avery's tense face to the missing wedding band on her left ring finger, then to Mitchell's hand, which was holding her arm protectively. Over the next few hours, as doctors performed an endless battery of tests, fragments of reality began to materialize. Apparently his helicopter accident had occurred while on a business trip to Seattle. The pilot died instantly, and Donovan miraculously survived. "Sterling Investments is fine," Mitchell reported, keeping a safe distance from the bed. "I have assumed temporary control, as determined in our corporate agreement." Donovan watched his supposed best friend with growing suspicion. Mitchell had always been the duo's strategist, while Donovan was the face of the company, the charismatic one who closed the deals. Now, there was something calculating in his gaze that didn't match his memories. "Why are we divorced?" he asked Avery directly, when they were finally alone in the room. She sat in the armchair next to the bed, wringing her hands in her lap. "It was a very difficult 2 years before the accident, Don. You changed. The scandals started with that embezzlement of project funds in Phoenix. What detour? I never—" Donovan trailed off, frustrated by the gaps in his memory. "You confessed, Don. It was in the papers, in the federal investigations. The company almost went bankrupt. And you—" She took a deep breath. "You publicly blamed Mitchell, tried to frame him. It was horrible." None of it made sense. Donovan closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts. In his memories, Sterling Investments was a model of corporate governance. He and Mitchell had built the company from the ground up, turning it into one of the largest financial consultancies on the East Coast. "And when exactly did you and Mitchell start—" He left the question hanging, unable to complete it. "After the divorce," Avery responded quickly. "He was my support throughout the process, during his recovery. It happened naturally." Donovan watched the face of the woman he still considered his wife. Avery had always been a terrible liar. Her nose wrinkled slightly when she didn't tell the truth, just like she was doing now. That night, alone in his hospital room, Donovan began to put the pieces together. The accident had happened during a trip to Seattle, but he didn't remember any engagements on the West Coast. The dates didn't fit with his mental schedule, and there was something disturbingly convenient about the way it all unfolded. He picked up his cell phone, brought by a nurse earlier, but it was locked with a password he didn't recognize. On the bedside table, he found a folder with newspaper clippings, courtesy of Mitchell, who apparently wanted to help him catch up. The headlines painted a devastating picture of his reputation, but something between the lines bothered him. One photo in particular caught his eye. him and Mitchell at a press conference 2 months before the accident. While his face showed clear signs of stress and confusion, Mitchell smiled discreetly, almost satisfied. The contrast was disturbing. Donovan knew he needed to regain his memories, not only to understand his past, but to discover the truth about his present. His intuition, the same one that had guided him in countless negotiations, screamed that there was something deeply wrong with this whole story. Observing the city of Boston through the hospital window, Donovan made a silent promise to himself. I would recover every fragment of lost memory, no matter the cost. And if his suspicions were correct, if the accident hadn't been an accident, the people responsible would pay dearly for having destroyed his life. The heart monitor continued its rhythmic beeping, like a metronome marking the beginning of his personal investigation. Outside the room, Mitchell and Avery spoke in tense whispers, unaware that the man they believed they had completely controlled was about to turn their game upside down. The first few days after waking up from the coma were a whirlwind of medical exams, physiotherapy sessions, and controlled visits. Donovan watched each person who entered his room with a new critical eye, especially after Dr. Chen confirmed that his amnesia specifically affected the 2 years before the accident. "It's like someone ripped out specific pages from the book of my life," he commented to Dr. Marcus Walsh, the neurologist specializing in brain trauma who had joined his medical team. "The mind has interesting ways of protecting itself, Mr. Sterling," Walsh replied, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. "Sometimes we block traumatic memories as a defense mechanism." But Donovan couldn't accept that explanation. During the long nights in the hospital, he began to methodically catalogue every piece of information he could gather. On his new iPad, since his old one had been destroyed in the accident, he created a detailed timeline, marking events he could remember and the empty spaces he needed to fill. A night nurse, Gloria Martinez, became his unwitting ally. She had worked at the hospital throughout her coma, and unlike the other staff who seemed instructed to limit information, Gloria was naturally talkative. "You know what I always thought was weird?" she commented one night while checking his vitals. "His ex-wife never showed up at the same times as that elegant lady who came to visit him." "What lady?" Donovan felt his heart quicken. "Catherine something. She always came on Tuesdays, 3 p.m. sharp. She stopped showing up about 2 months ago." Catherine Lawson, her mentor in the early years of her career and current member of the board of Sterling Investments. Why had no one mentioned his visits? During a particularly painful physical therapy session, Donovan got more information from his therapist, Brian. "You had impressive strength before the accident," Brian commented, helping him with the strengthening exercises. "You used to tell me about your morning runs in Cambridge." Cambridge, not Newport. Apparently he had moved into a flat in Cambridge after the divorce, another detail that no one bothered to mention. Mitchell continued to show up daily, always bringing company reports and acting like the devoted friend. But Donovan noticed how he subtly avoided certain topics, especially when questions turned to the events that preceded the accident. "That project in Phoenix," Donovan casually mentioned during one of those visits. "I have some vague memories about problems with investors." Mitchell stiffened momentarily before responding with his usual aplomb. "It's been a rough season, Don. Maybe we'd better focus on your recovery now." The reaction confirmed his suspicions. There was something about the Phoenix project that Mitchell didn't want him to remember. One afternoon, when Avery came to visit alone, Donovan decided to try a different approach. "I remember our last anniversary dinner," he commented softly. "You were wearing that green dress you bought in Paris." Avery frowned. "Don, our last anniversary dinner was at Le Bernardin in New York. I was wearing a black dress." The discrepancy between his memories and the reality reported by others was disconcerting, but Donovan was beginning to see a pattern. Certain memories, especially those related to financial decisions and corporate meetings, appeared altered or completely missing. During a video call with his sister Madeline, who lived in Seattle, he got another piece of the puzzle. "You were acting so strange that week," she commented. "He called me at 3 a.m, saying he had discovered something important about Mitchell, but that he needed to check some documents before confronting him." The call was interrupted by a technical glitch before Madeline could elaborate, and all subsequent attempts to resume the matter were thwarted by mysterious interference. On the 10th day after her awakening, Catherine Lawson finally appeared. She waited until Mitchell left the hospital and entered the room like a silent shadow. "You left something with me," she said without preamble, her tone low and urgent. "A sealed envelope with instructions to only open if something happened to you." Donovan felt his pulse quicken. "And you opened it?" "Not yet." Catherine glanced nervously at the door. "But maybe it's time." Before they could continue their conversation, a nurse, whom Donovan had never seen before, entered announcing the end of visiting hours. Catherine left quickly, leaving only a business card with a Boston address written on the back. That night, lying in his hospital bed, Donovan reviewed his notes. The accident had happened shortly after his supposed discovery about Mitchell. His marriage had fallen apart during a period of which he had no memory. And now, there was a mysterious envelope that his past self had entrusted to Catherine. His physical recovery was progressing faster than doctors expected, driven by his determination to uncover the truth. Each day brought new fragments of information, small inconsistencies in the stories they told him, glances exchanged when they thought he wasn't watching. The puzzle was far from complete, but one thing was becoming clear. The man he was before the accident had discovered something dangerous enough that someone wanted to permanently silence him. And now, ironically, his amnesia could be the only thing keeping him alive as he reconstructs the truth, piece by piece. Catherine's note burned in the pocket of Donovan's hospital gown as he waited for Brian, his physical therapist, for another session. His mind wandered to the address noted on the back, 1842 Beacon Street, a historic area of Boston he knew well. What had your past self kept in that envelope? "Ready for a new challenge today?" Brian entered the physical therapy room pushing a wheelchair. "Doctor, Chen approved us trying some more intense exercises." During the session, Donovan discovered that his muscles held memories that his mind had lost. His fingers remembered precisely how to tie a tie, and his feet kept the exact rhythm of his old morning runs, even if he couldn't remember them. "Impressive," Brian commented, watching his progress. "You mentioned you used to swim too." The seemingly innocent question triggered something in his memory. A swimming pool, a heated argument with Mitchell, numbers on a computer screen that didn't make sense. "There was a meeting," muttered Donovan, trying to grab the memory fragment, "at Mitchell's house on Martha's Vineyard." Brian looked uncomfortable at the mention, quickly changing the subject. Donovan would later discover that the physical therapist had been hired specifically by Mitchell for his recovery. Back in his room, he found Avery organizing some new clothes he had brought for him. Her perfume, a mix of jasmine and vanilla that she always wore, awakened another memory. A rainy night, screams, papers scattered on the kitchen table. "Why did you actually file for divorce?" he asked abruptly. Avery froze, a navy blue shirt still in her hands. "We've talked about this, Don. The scandals, your change in behavior." "No," he interrupted more firmly. "I want the truth. What happened that rainy night?" Her face paled. "What rainy night?" "In the kitchen. You were crying. There were documents." "You're confusing things," she replied quickly, but her hands were shaking as she folded the shirt. "I need to go. Mitchell is waiting for me for dinner." After his departure, Donovan picked up his iPad and began searching old news stories about Sterling Investments. The articles about the Phoenix scandal seemed carefully edited, with crucial information conveniently omitted. On his digital timeline he marked the date, 3 months before the accident. A soft knock on the door interrupted his investigation. Gloria, the night nurse, came in with her overnight medications. "I have something for you," she whispered, discreetly sliding a small flash drive in with the pills. "I found this among his belongings when he was admitted. No one else knows it exists." The flash drive was black, with no identifying marks. Donovan felt his heart race, another piece of the puzzle revealing itself. "Why didn't you give it to me sooner?" Gloria glanced nervously down the hall. "Because I overheard conversations. Your friend, Mr. Harrison, had specific orders about what personal items could be returned to you. That night, After the hospital fell silent, Donovan connected the flash drive to the iPad. Most of the files were corrupt, but one document in particular caught his attention: a series of emails exchanged between him and a private investigator named Russell Hammond. "I confirm a suspicious pattern in bank transfers. MH made deposits into an offshore account on the same dates as the diversions. We need to meet in person to discuss additional evidence." The email was dated 3 days before the accident. The next morning, Mitchell showed up earlier than usual, bringing coffee and bagels from a nearby bakery. "How are you feeling today, partner?" he asked with his signature smile, but Donovan noticed a subtle tension in his shoulders. "Better. The memories are slowly starting to come back." Mitchell dropped the coffee he was holding, staining the hospital floor. "What kind of memories?" "Fragments, mostly. That meeting on Martha's Vineyard, for example." Mitchell's face hardened for a split second before he regained his composure. "Don't push too hard, Don. The doctors said the memories should come back naturally." During the rest of the visit, Donovan watched as his former friend constantly checked his cell phone, quickly responding to urgent messages. When Mitchell finally left, he waited 10 minutes before pulling out his own phone and calling a number he had memorized from the flash drive. "Russell Hammond speaking." "Mr. Hammond, this is Donovan Sterling." A long silence followed. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't expect to hear your voice again. We need to talk about those emails we exchanged before my accident." "What accident?" Hammond's voice was loaded with meaning. "The helicopter that crashed under extremely convenient circumstances for certain people." The conversation was interrupted by a nurse coming in to check his vitals, but Donovan had managed to arrange a meeting with Hammond for the following week, when he would be discharged. That afternoon, during his session with Dr. Walsh, Donovan began to question his own perception of reality. What if the memories you were recovering were false? What if Mitchell and Avery were telling the truth about their change in behavior? "Dr. Walsh," he began cautiously, "is it possible for someone to manipulate memories, make a person believe in events that never happened?" The neurologist thoughtfully adjusted his glasses. "Memory is a fascinating thing, Mr. Sterling. It's much more malleable than people realize. But why are you asking that?" Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Envelope open. Disturbing contents. Trust no one. See you soon." The conspiracy of silence around him began to unravel, revealing a web of lies much more complex than he had imagined. As the sun set over Boston, casting long shadows through the hospital window, Donovan realized he was involved in a game far more dangerous than a simple business dispute, and somewhere, in an office overlooking Boston Harbor, Mitchell Harrison was making an urgent call. "He's starting to remember. We need to act fast." Donovan's hospital release was scheduled for a rainy Thursday. As he organized his belongings, including the flash drive secretly stored in the lining of his toiletry bag, he reflected on his latest discoveries. The envelope that Catherine had opened remained a mystery, as did the contents of the meeting on Martha's Vineyard that provoked such peculiar reactions in Mitchell. "Your apartment in Cambridge is ready to receive you," informed Mitchell, who had insisted on accompanying him. "I hired a nurse to help in the first few days." "That won't be necessary," Donovan replied dryly. "Gloria has already volunteered to pick up some extra shifts." Mitchell frowned. "Gloria? The night nurse? I don't think that's appropriate. Since when do you decide what's appropriate for me, Mitchell?" The silence that followed was filled with tension. Donovan watched as his former friend quickly dialed a message on his cell phone, presumably to Avery. The couple had developed the annoying habit of constantly communicating about their progress and behavior. During the drive to Cambridge, Donovan pretended to sleep in the back seat of Mitchell's Mercedes, taking the opportunity to discreetly observe the driver's reactions through the rearview mirror. At each red light, Mitchell checked his messages with increasing anxiety. The Cambridge apartment was an elegant duplex overlooking the Charles River. Although Donovan didn't remember living there, he found traces of his life over the past 2 years, photographs of himself at corporate events, a bookshelf filled with books on finance, a makeshift gym in the office. "I'll let you rest," Mitchell said, placing a folder on the coffee table. "Here are some company documents you might want to review when you feel up to it." As soon as Mitchell left, Donovan began a meticulous search of the apartment. In his old office, he found a safe built into the wall behind an abstract painting. The code. His old self had been smart. It was his late mother's birth date, something Mitchell would never know. Inside the safe, in addition to bank documents and passports, there was a small notebook. The last pages contained a series of numbers and initials that seemed to form some kind of code. One particular note caught his eye. MH+AS, Vineyard, 2022. The doorbell rang, interrupting his investigation. It was Catherine Lawson, looking older than he remembered. "We need to talk somewhere safe," she said, quickly entering. "Your apartment is probably bugged." "Like in the movie Paranoia?" Donovan tried to joke, but Catherine's serious look silenced him. "The envelope you handed me," she continued, lowering her voice, "contained documents about irregular transfers from Sterling Investments to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, all signed by Mitchell, using his power of attorney during the period in which you began exhibiting strange behavior." "What kind of behaviors?" "Illogical business decisions, angry outbursts in meetings, frequent forgetfulness." At the time, everyone chalked it up to stress. But now... Catherine hesitated. "Donovan, you were being poisoned." The revelation hit him like a punch. His hands shook as he poured water for both of them, thousands of questions forming in his mind. "The toxicology tests after the accident," he began. "They were manipulated," Catherine added. "I have a contact at the lab who confirmed the tampering with the results. Mitchell paid a considerable sum of money to keep it secret." At that moment, Donovan's cell phone vibrated with a message from Avery. "Can we talk? I'm worried about you." Catherine watched the message over her shoulder. She always knew, Donovan. The divorce was a sham to keep you away from the company while Mitchell took control. "Why are you helping me now?" he asked, studying his former mentor's face. "Because you saved my career 15 years ago when no one believed in me anymore. And because..." She hesitated. "Mitchell is planning a hostile takeover of the company by Blackstone Corp. It would destroy everything we've built." Donovan sat heavily on the couch, his mind processing the information. The Phoenix Project, the meeting on Martha's Vineyard, the emails to Russell Hammond. Everything was starting to make sense. "We need hard evidence," he said finally, "and we need to find out who else is involved." "I've already taken the first step," Catherine smiled lightly. "Russell Hammond is investigating the helicopter pilot. Apparently he received a substantial deposit 2 days before the accident." A noise in the hallway made them both silence. Footsteps approached the apartment, and then the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. "Someone else has access to your apartment," Catherine whispered, already moving toward the emergency exit. "Find Hammond," Donovan muttered quickly. "I will deal with our unexpected visitors." As Catherine disappeared up the fire escape, Donovan turned off the lights and strategically positioned himself behind a column. The door slowly opened, revealing 2 familiar silhouettes, Mitchell and Avery, sneaking in like thieves in the night. The cat-and-mouse game was just beginning, and Donovan finally understood that his survival depended not only on recovering his memories, but on discovering who the people he once considered family really were. Donovan remained motionless in the shadows as Mitchell and Avery sneaked into his apartment. The couple moved familiarly through the space, indicating that this was not their first clandestine visit. "Are you sure he went out with Catherine?" Avery whispered, turning on just the kitchen light. "My lobby contact confirmed it. We need to be quick." Mitchell headed straight for the office, as if he knew exactly what to look for. Donovan watched silently as they methodically searched the room. His heart quickened as Mitchell approached the safe, but relief washed over him when he realized the notebook was safely in his pocket. "The safe was recently opened," Mitchell murmured, examining the mechanism. "Damn, he must have changed the combination." "Mitch," Avery called from the room, her voice shaky. "I found this." She held a photo Donovan didn't remember seeing before, him and Avery on Martha's Vineyard, younger and visibly in love. On the back, a date, August 2022, 3 months before the alleged strange behaviors began. "Put it away," Mitchell ordered sharply. "We need to find the Phoenix Project documents." At that moment, Donovan decided to reveal his presence. He turned on the nearby lamp, making the couple jump in fright. "Looking for something specific?" His voice sounded dangerously calm. "Don!" Avery dropped the photograph. "We thought you left." "Clearly." He approached slowly, noticing how Mitchell subtly positioned herself between him and Avery. "What exactly do you expect to find in Phoenix's documents?" "We were worried," Mitchell tried to explain, his professional tone masking nervousness. "You've been acting different since you woke up, asking strange questions. We wanted to make sure you're okay." "Sneaking into my apartment at night? That doesn't sound like worry, that sounds like panic." Mitchell's cell phone vibrated, and Donovan caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Dr. Walsh. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. His neurologist was in on the conspiracy. "Why is Dr. Walsh calling you at this time?" he asked casually, watching Mitchell's face pale. "It's about your recovery," Avery interjected quickly. "We're all working together to help you, Don." "How did you help me with those illogical business decisions before the accident?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mitchell and Avery exchanged quick glances, a silent communication that revealed years of shared secrets. "What exactly do you remember?" Mitchell asked, his stance subtly changing to something more defensive. "Enough to know that you're not here to help me." Donovan walked to the window, watching the lights of Cambridge reflected in the Charles River. "What really happened on Martha's Vineyard?" "Don, you're not okay." Avery tried to get closer, but he held up his hand, keeping his distance. "I'm perfectly fine. In fact, I'm more lucid than I've been in the last 2 years, aren't I, Mitchell? Without your special treatments to keep me controlled." Mitchell moved quickly toward the door, but Donovan was already prepared. He pressed a button on his cell phone, and the sound of a recording filled the room. The previous conversation with Catherine about the poisoning and the bank transfers. "That's crazy." Mitchell tried to talk back, but his voice shook. "You can't believe Catherine's conspiracy theories." "How did I believe you when you said I had confessed to embezzling funds? Or when Avery insisted our divorce was my fault?" Avery began to cry, but Donovan noticed that her tears seemed rehearsed, like so many other things in her recent life. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "We did what was necessary. The company was perfectly fine until Mitchell decided he wanted more power," Donovan added. "What about you, Avery? What was your price? The promise of a luxurious life with my so-called best friend?" Mitchell's cell phone vibrated again, more insistent. He ignored him, but his nervousness was palpable. "Don, you're confused," he tried to argue. "Let us help. Dr. Walsh has a new treatment that can—" "Doping me again? No thanks." Donovan smiled coldly. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my apartment before I send this recording to the FBI." The couple hurriedly left, leaving the photograph of Martha's Vineyard behind. Donovan took it, studying the smiling faces that now seemed to belong to strangers. As soon as he was alone, he called Catherine. "They took the bait," he reported. "Mitchell is panicking just as we predicted." "Good," Catherine replied. "Hammond found the helicopter pilot. He's willing to talk, but he wants protection." "Tell him he will. And Catherine, be careful. Dr. Walsh is more deeply involved than we realized." After hanging up, Donovan opened his laptop and accessed a facial recognition program he had installed earlier. On the screen, dozens of corporate photographs from the past 2 years were analyzed, revealing a disturbing pattern in his own expression, his eyes gradually losing focus, his smile becoming vague, classic signs of chronic intoxication. The truth was emerging from the shadows, but Donovan knew he needed to be cautious. Mitchell and Avery had resources, connections, and, most dangerously, the perfect alibi. His own medical condition that could easily be used to discredit him. The night promised to be long, and as the rain began to fall over Cambridge, Donovan Sterling prepared for his next move on the deadly chessboard that his life had become. The morning after the confrontation with Mitchell and Avery, Donovan woke up to the sound of his cell phone. It was Russell Hammond. "I found our pilot," Hammond said without preamble. "He's in a motel outside of Providence. He's scared, but willing to talk." Donovan dressed quickly, choosing a grey suit he found in the closet, clothes that looked like they belonged to another life. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he noticed how his eyes had changed since the corporate photos he had analyzed the night before. The haze of intoxication had been replaced by a sharp clarity. Gloria arrived promptly at 8 a.m., as agreed, bringing not only her nursing equipment, but also valuable information. "Dr. Walsh made an irregular visit to the hospital last night," she reported, checking his vitals. "Almost an hour spent in the medical file." "Does he have access to my records?" "Technically, no, not without authorization, but the archives clerk is new and he's persuasive." Donovan made a mental note to investigate hospital records. If Walsh was manipulating his drug tests, he would need inside help. Catherine called while he was drinking coffee. "We need to meet. I discovered something about the Phoenix Project that explains everything." "My apartment isn't safe," he replied, remembering the previous night's break-in. "Boston Public Library, rare manuscript section in 1 hour." The library was quiet at this time of the morning, with only a few students occupying the old wooden tables. Catherine was already waiting for him, a brown folder on the table. "The Phoenix Project was never about embezzlement," she explained, opening the folder. "It was a strategic acquisition of Biotech Solutions, a biotechnology company that was developing a new type of psychotropic drug." Donovan pored over the documents, financial reports, coded emails, clinical trial results. "The drug was experimental," continued Catherine, "able to alter recent memories and influence user behavior. Mitchell found out about it from one of the investors and saw an opportunity. To manipulate me," Donovan added, the pieces falling into place. "The company cafe." "Exactly. He had direct access to your daily routine, and Avery made sure I took my vitamins at home." Donovan felt a wave of nausea. "How long?" "At least 18 months before the accident. The symptoms were subtle at first, small memory lapses, mood swings. But when you started to suspect, they increased the dose," he concluded, remembering the hazy last few months before the accident. Movement on the periphery of his vision caught his attention. A man in a dark suit had just entered the section, feigning interest in the nearby shelves. "Don't look now," he murmured to Catherine, "but I think we have company." Catherine discreetly kept the documents. "There is an emergency exit through the periodicals hallway." They stood up casually, but another man appeared, blocking the way to the main exit. Donovan's cell phone vibrated. A message from Mitchell. "We should talk civilly about this." "They wouldn't try anything in public," Catherine whispered, but her voice betrayed uncertainty. Donovan guided her through the stacks, his mind calculating escape routes. Years of morning runs in Cambridge had given him an intimate knowledge of the area. They reached the emergency exit only to find it blocked by a book cart under maintenance. The man in the suit approached. "Miss Lawson," he called politely, "Mr. Harrison would like a word." "Tell Mitchell my lawyers will be in touch," Catherine replied firmly. The man smiled humorlessly. Unfortunately, it wasn't a request. Donovan realized they needed to separate. Catherine, the main staircase, now. As she ran in one direction, he charged directly at the man in the suit, using his body as a distraction. Years of college rugby proved his worth when he managed to knock the bouncer off balance, gaining precious seconds. The chase through the historic library would be comical if it weren't so serious. Donovan weaved between the shelves, strategically knocking over stacks of books to hinder his pursuers. His cell phone vibrated again, this time a message from Avery. "Please, Don, don't make this any harder than it needs to be." The irony of the situation was not lost on him. Just a few months ago, he was celebrating his wedding anniversary with this woman. Now, she was complicit in a plot to destroy him. He reached the library's main exit, while security guards were still trapped in the maze of shelves. Catherine was already waiting for him in her car. "Where to?" she asked, speeding up as soon as he entered. "Providence," replied Donovan, checking to see if he still had the folder with the documents. "It's time to talk to our pilot." As the car sped through the streets of Boston, Donovan reflected on how his life had turned into a corporate thriller. But unlike the movies, there was no guarantee of a happy ending. "Mitchell isn't going to give up easily," Catherine commented, watching in the rearview mirror. "He has a lot to lose." "We all do," Donovan replied, thinking of all the stolen memories, all the lost moments he would never get back. "The difference is that now we know exactly what we are fighting for." The trip to Providence was tense, with Catherine alternating between secondary routes to lose potential pursuers. Donovan took the time to look more closely at documents about the Phoenix Project, each page revealing a new layer of betrayal. "Drugs were initially developed as a treatment for PTSD," Catherine explained, maneuvering the car down a coastal road. "Biotech Solutions was close to a revolutionary discovery, a way to rewrite traumatic memories. Mitchell saw the alternative potential. To make me the perfect villain," Donovan finished, his voice bitter. "Someone who would confess to any crime, who would act irrationally enough to warrant removal." The motel where the pilot was staying was a seedy establishment on the outskirts of Providence, the kind of place that takes cash and asks no questions. Hammond was waiting for them in the parking lot, his face etched with concern. "Room 115, he informed, handing over a key. "His name is Marcus Reeves. He's scared but cooperative, especially after Mitchell tried to silence him permanently last week." Donovan and Catherine found Marcus sitting on the edge of the bed, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. She was younger than Donovan expected, probably in her 30s, with eyes that had seen too much. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus stood up abruptly, I'm sorry. I didn't know they really meant to." "Start at the beginning," Donovan interrupted softly, sitting down in a worn chair. "I want to know everything." The story Marcus told over the next 40 minutes confirmed Donovan's worst suspicions. Mitchell had recruited him months before the accident, offering a significant sum to guarantee a troublesome landing during a business trip. "The plan was to scare you," Marcus explained, running his hands over his tired face. "Create a controlled accident that would justify prolonged hospitalization. But something went wrong with the controls." "What exactly went wrong?" Catherine pressed. "Someone tampered with the hydraulics. The helicopter became completely uncontrollable. His voice trailed off. "I really thought we were going to die that day." Donovan felt a shiver run down his spine. "Why did you decide to speak now?" Marcus pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket. "Because I found this in my mailbox 3 days ago. Pictures of me and my daughter at her high school. A clear message from Mitchell. Keep quiet, or she pays the price." Catherine's cell phone vibrated with an urgent notification. "Trouble. Walsh just scheduled a press conference for this afternoon. He's going to announce that his tests show signs of paranoid schizophrenia." "Classic," Donovan laughed humorlessly. "Discrediting the victim before they can expose the truth." "There's more," Catherine continued reading. "Sterling Investments has issued a preliminary statement regarding the sale to Blackstone Corp. Mitchell is expediting the process." A sudden noise in the parking lot alerted the group. Hammond quickly entered the room. 3 black SUVs just arrived. We need to move. Now." Marcus paled. "The back exit, through the laundry room. I need to get some things." "There's no time." Donovan grabbed the pilot's arm. "You're coming with us." The group moved quickly through the motel's back hallways, the sound of doors being kicked in echoing behind them. Catherine led the way to a spare car that Hammond had parked strategically. "Separate into 2 groups," Hammond instructed quickly. "I'll take Marcus to safety. You two, head to Newport. I have a contact at the Coast Guard who can help." Donovan hesitated briefly. "Marcus, those pictures of your daughter. Mitchell isn't the only one who can play this game. I'll make sure she's protected." The pilot nodded, gratitude and fear mixed in his gaze. "There's one more thing you need to know. The night before the accident, I overheard a conversation between Mitchell and Avery. They mentioned something about a test on Martha's Vineyard, something that went wrong." Before they could explore this information, the sound of approaching voices forced the group to separate. Donovan and Catherine set off towards Newport, while Hammond led Marcus to his own hideout. In the car, Donovan finally voiced the thought that had been tormenting him. The meeting on Martha's Vineyard must have been the first test of the drug. Makes sense, Catherine agreed, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. The timing coincides with the onset of their behavioral changes. And Avery... Donovan closed his eyes, the pain of betrayal still fresh. She wasn't just a passive accomplice. She was an active part of the plan from the beginning. The sun was beginning to set over Rhode Island, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Donovan of other twilights, of memories he now questioned were real or fabricated. His phone rang. It was Avery. "Don't answer," Catherine warned, but Donovan had already made up his mind. "Hello, sweetheart," he answered, his voice controlled. "I imagine Mitchell already told you about our little meeting at the library." "Don, please." Avery's voice shook. "You don't understand. Everything we did, was it for money, power, or did you really fall in love with Mitchell during those long nights plotting my destruction?" Silence on the other end of the line was response enough. "We met on Martha's Vineyard," Donovan continued. "Tomorrow noon at the beach house. You owe me some answers." He hung up before she could respond, knowing he had just baited his own trap. Catherine looked at him with concern. "That's risky." "Yes," Donovan agreed, watching the lights of Newport approaching on the horizon. "But sometimes you have to risk everything to recover what was lost." The beach house on Martha's Vineyard remained exactly as Donovan remembered, a stately Victorian building overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. He and Catherine arrived an hour before their scheduled time with Avery, giving them enough time to prepare their strategy. "Hammond has confirmed that Marcus and his daughter are safe in a secure location," Catherine reported, checking her phone, "and I got access to the original Biotech Solutions records. The drug they used on you, DN457, was never approved for human testing." Donovan watched the house through binoculars, noting the subtle security changes Mitchell had implemented. New cameras, motion sensors, guards discreetly positioned on property boundaries. "Mitchell won't let her come alone," he commented, lowering the binoculars. "They probably already have a containment team ready." "That's why I brought reinforcements," Catherine smiled, pointing to a group of approaching SUVs. "Some old friends from the FBI Financial Crimes Division who owe me favors." Federal agents quickly established an invisible perimeter around the property. The plan was simple: allow Mitchell to think he had the upper hand, while he was actually walking directly into a trap. At 11:45, a familiar black Bentley entered the property. Avery got out of the car first, wearing a white dress that made Donovan's heart sink. It was identical to the one she wore on her wedding day. Mitchell followed, trying to look casual in his Italian suit, but his restless eyes betrayed his tension. "Showtime," muttered Donovan, adjusting the microphone hidden in his lapel. He had chosen to meet them on the back porch, where years ago he had proposed to Avery. "Don," Avery called softly when she saw him, her voice carrying a mix of guilt and something else. Fear. "You look fine." "Surprisingly well for someone who has been systematically poisoned for 2 years, isn't it?" He kept his voice controlled, watching as Mitchell subtly checked his surroundings. "Let's keep this conversation civil," Mitchell suggested, his hand discreetly touching Avery's back. "Everyone here wants the best for the company." "The company?" Donovan laughed humorlessly. "Is this how you justify trying to kill me, because of the company?" "You were out of control, Don," Avery interjected, stepping forward. "The drug was supposed to be temporary, just until we could stabilize the situation with the investors." "Tell me about Martha's Vineyard," Donovan demanded, watching as they both stiffened at the mention. "The first test was here, wasn't it?" Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. "It was her idea, actually. Avery suggested it would be more controlled, in a family setting." The revelation hit Donovan like a physical punch. He turned to Avery, years of memories distorting before his eyes. "Why?" "Because you changed," Avery exploded, tears starting to fall. "After Catherine almost exposed that scheme in 2021, you became obsessed with corporate transparency. You wanted to reveal everything, every little detail of the offshore operations we've built over the years. So you decided to drug me, turn me into the villain of the story. It was kind, at first, Mitchell interjected, his mask of composure beginning to crack. Small doses with your breakfast. Avery monitored the effects, adjusted the amounts. The problem is that you started to develop resistance. And then they decided that I would be more useful dead than alive, Donovan added, his suspicions finally confirmed. The accident wasn't supposed to be fatal, Avery protested, but her voice trailed off. Just convincing enough. Mitchell suddenly pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at Donovan's chest. Enough talk. You're going to sign the sale documents to Blackstone, confess your crimes, and disappear into some psychiatric clinic in Europe. Or what? Are you going to kill me right here in front of all these witnesses? Mitchell frowned in confusion, only to be startled by the sound of approaching helicopters and FBI agents emerging from every corner of the property. Mitchell Harrison, Avery Sterling, announced an amplified voice. You are under arrest for attempted murder, corporate fraud and conspiracy. The chaos that ensued was almost anticlimactic. Mitchell attempted to flee, only to be quickly subdued. Avery simply collapsed into the nearest chair, all her elegant composure finally crumbling. You planned this, she murmured as Donovan approached, as the agents put on the handcuffs. Since the hospital. I learned from the best, he replied softly, watching as the agents led Mitchell to a squad car. You and Mitchell taught me well about manipulation and betrayal. Catherine approached as the final details of the operation were finalized. Biotech Solutions documents will be enough for a solid conviction, and Marcus has agreed to testify. Donovan watched the ocean, the waves crashing rhythmically onto the beach below. So many memories in that house, and now he wondered how many of them were real, how many had been distorted by the drug, and how many were simply lies concocted by people he loved. What happens now? Catherine asked softly. Now? Donovan sighed, feeling the weight of the last few months finally starting to lift. Now, we begin to rebuild. Not just the company, but the truth. After Mitchell and Avery's arrest on Martha's Vineyard, Donovan found himself immersed in a whirlwind of depositions, meetings with lawyers, and endless sessions with federal investigators. The Boston headquarters of Sterling Investments buzzed with rumors and speculation, while the financial press reveled in every new detail of the scandal. Catherine had temporarily assumed operational control of the company, working tirelessly to stabilize the situation with investors and customers. In her new office on the 42nd floor, she and Donovan pored over Biotech Solutions records. The development of the DN457 began as a legitimate project, Catherine explained, spreading reports out on the glass table. But at some point, Mitchell discovered its potential for behavioral manipulation and saw an opportunity. What about biotech? Donovan asked, flipping through the pages of preliminary tests. How did they get involved? Money, Catherine sighed. Mitchell offered unlimited financing through our offshore subsidiaries. For a company on the verge of bankruptcy, it was an irresistible offer. The phone on the desk rang. It was Gloria, the former hospital nurse who now worked as Donovan's personal assistant. Dr. Walsh is at the front desk. He says he wants to make a deal. Donovan exchanged glances with Catherine. Walsh had disappeared shortly after the arrests, probably alerted by some contact within the FBI. His voluntary appearance was suspicious, to say the least. Send him up, Donovan instructed. And Gloria, make sure the federal agents are in position. Walsh entered the room looking like a shadow of the confident doctor Donovan had met at the hospital. His face was lined with fatigue, and his hands shook slightly as he held a brown folder. I came to do the right thing, he announced, placing the folder on the table. All dosage records, test changes, instructions from Mitchell. It's all here. Why now? Catherine asked, her voice thick with suspicion. Because... Walsh hesitated, running a hand over his tired face. Because there's more at stake than you realize. DN457 wasn't Mitchell's first experiment. Donovan felt a shiver run down his spine. What are you talking about? Before you, there were others, executives from competing companies, politicians, even judges. Mitchell had been building his network of influence for years, using different versions of the drug. Catherine began looking through the documents in the folder, her face turning pale as she read. "That's monstrous." "The meeting on Martha's Vineyard," Donovan pressed, remembering Avery's words. "It wasn't just a test, it was a demonstration." Walsh nodded slowly. To potential buyers, Mitchell was planning to expand the operation, turn it into an international business. Avery. She was the liaison to the European buyers. The revelation hit Donovan like a physical punch. His ex-wife wasn't just a manipulated accomplice by Mitchell, she was an active participant in a much larger conspiracy. "Why did you decide to speak now?" Catherine asked, still looking through the documents. "Because they started eliminating evidence," Walsh replied, his voice shaking. 3 biotech scientists died in accidents in the last week. I'm probably next on the list." Donovan stood up, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of Boston. The afternoon sun reflected off the glass buildings, creating an almost blinding glare. How many other victims were there? How many lives had been destroyed by Mitchell's ambition? "We need federal protection for Walsh," he said finally, turning to Catherine. "And we need to reopen every negotiation, every deal that Sterling has done in the last 5 years." "It's going to destroy the company," Catherine warned softly. "Perhaps it is necessary," Donovan replied. "Sometimes you have to burn everything down to rebuild from scratch." Walsh was escorted out of the building by federal agents, leaving Donovan and Catherine with a mountain of incriminating documents and an impossible decision ahead of them. The full truth about Mitchell's operations was finally emerging, and it was darker than anyone could have imagined. "What do we do now?" Catherine asked, organizing the papers into neat piles. "Now?" Donovan smiled humorlessly. "Now we start cleaning up the mess. And then we rebuild something better in its place." The sun was beginning to set over Boston, casting long shadows across the room. Somewhere in the city, Mitchell and Avery awaited trial, their lives of luxury and power reduced to a prison cell. And in his office at the top of Sterling Tower, Donovan Sterling began to plan not just his revenge, but his redemption. A week after Dr. Walsh's confession, Donovan found himself reviewing Sterling Investments security recordings from the past 3 years. The conference room on the 42nd floor had been transformed into a makeshift investigation center, with screens displaying dozens of videos simultaneously. "I found something," Gloria announced, pausing a recording from December 2022. "Look at Mitchell's expression when you mentioned the Phoenix Project at this board meeting." Donovan watched closely. On screen, his past self looked confused, disoriented, while Mitchell maintained a calculating smile. The date coincides with the period of highest dosage of DN457, according to Walsh's records. "Catherine," he called over the intercom, "I need you to check something in the biotech archives. December 2022. Were there any changes to the formula at that time?" Catherine appeared minutes later, carrying a thick folder. "Not just a change. Mitchell ordered them to triple the concentration of the psychoactive component. That's when you started having those public episodes of paranoia." "How convenient," Donovan murmured, massaging his temples. The headaches were still frequent, a persistent reminder of the poison that had coursed through his veins for so long. An FBI agent, Lucas Morrison, entered the room carrying his laptop. "Mr. Sterling, we just received Avery's bank records. She had a secret account in Zurich, moving millions over the last 5 years. Even before our wedding," Donovan concluded, feeling a new wave of betrayal. "She was never just a reluctant participant, was she?" "No," Morrison confirmed. "In fact, we found evidence that she was involved in similar operations in London and Frankfurt. DN457 was not her first rodeo." The revelation caused a heavy silence in the room. Donovan stood up, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. Ships entered and left the port, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the skyscraper above. "I need to see her," he decided suddenly. "Not a good idea," Catherine warned, but Donovan was already reaching for his coat. "I need to hear the truth from her. No more lies, no more manipulations, just the raw truth. The Plymouth Federal Detention Center was an austere complex of concrete and barbed wire. Avery waited in the drawing room, wearing an orange uniform that contrasted dramatically with her old designer dresses. "You look good," she commented as he sat down. "More yourself." "Funny how stopping being poisoned daily can do that to a person," Donovan replied dryly. "Why, Avery? From the beginning, why?" She sighed, running her fingers through her now dull hair. "Do you really want to know the whole truth? It's the least you owe me. I met Mitchell in Oxford 15 years ago. We were already developing the DN457 concept with a group of British researchers. We needed funding, corporate connections." She paused, studying her hands. "You were perfect, charismatic, successful, too confident to be suspicious." The coldness of his confession hit Donovan like a physical punch. "Our entire marriage—" "It was strategic," she added. "But I won't lie and say I didn't feel anything for you. There were moments when I almost gave up on the plan." "Like on Martha's Vineyard?" Avery visibly stiffened. "Do you remember that night?" "Fragments. You were crying on the porch. You said you loved me, that you were sorry. At the time I thought it was about some trivial fight, but it was about the first test, wasn't it? You had an adverse reaction to the first dose. You started having seizures. Mitchell said it was normal, that it would pass, but—" She closed her eyes, reliving the memory. "I thought I killed you." Donovan absorbed the information in silence, watching the woman he once believed he knew so well. Every happy memory of their marriage was now tainted by doubt. What was real? What was manipulation? "Are there others like me?" he finally asked. "Other victims?" "Dozens," Avery admitted. "Businessmen, politicians, judges. The DN457 was just the beginning. Mitchell is developing a new version, more powerful, more controllable." "I was," Donovan corrected, "unless there are other partners we don't know about." The gleam in Avery's eyes was answer enough. Donovan stood up abruptly, already reaching for his phone to alert Morrison. "Don," Avery called as he headed for the door. "I'm sorry, not for the operation, but for wasting the chance at something real." He stopped, but didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Avery." Back at Sterling Tower, Donovan found Catherine and Morrison organizing a new line of investigation based on Avery's information. "3 Deutsche Bank executives have exhibited behavior similar to yours in recent months," Morrison reported. "And there are rumors about a federal judge in Chicago." "We need a complete list," Donovan instructed. "All possible victims, everyone involved. This ends now." As night fell over Boston, Donovan remained in his office, watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, other people were living lives that were not completely theirs, manipulated by an invisible poison and unscrupulous people. His phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "Not everyone involved is behind bars. Beware the shadows. KL." The war was far from over, but for the first time since waking from his coma, Donovan Sterling knew exactly who he was fighting. The office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower had been transformed into a veritable operations center. In the 2 weeks following Avery's confession, Donovan and his team methodically mapped out DN457's network of victims. Each new name discovered revealed even deeper ramifications of the conspiracy. "I just got the toxicology results back from Judge Henderson in Chicago," Gloria announced, entering the room with a thick folder. "Metabolite levels are consistent with long-term use of DN457. Donovan studied the reports, recognizing familiar patterns. Henderson had drastically changed his behavior in recent months, reversing important decisions and mysteriously favoring certain corporations in his verdicts. "And here's something interesting," Catherine added, projecting documents onto the main screen. "All of the companies benefiting from Henderson's decisions have one common denominator. They are customers of Blackstone Corp." "The same Blackstone that was negotiating the purchase of Sterling," Donovan muttered, connecting the dots. Mitchell wasn't just selling the company, he was turning over the entire DN457 operation to them. Morrison's phone rang, interrupting the discussion. The FBI agent listened intently for a few moments, his face hardening. "We have a problem," he announced, hanging up. "Mitchell was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide." The silence that followed was deafening. Donovan felt his stomach turn. Mitchell was the centerpiece of the entire investigation, the link that could expose the true extent of the conspiracy. "Suicide?" Catherine questioned skeptically. "Or is someone cleaning up loose ends?" "I need to talk to Avery," Donovan decided, already reaching for his coat. "She needs to know that she is no longer protected." The drive to Plymouth was tense, with Morrison driving while discussing safety measures with his team. When they arrived at the detention center, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Avery had been moved into isolation following an attempted break-in hours earlier. 3 men tried to access his cell, the prison director explained. Professionals with seemingly legitimate Department of Justice credentials. Avery was pale when Donovan entered the drawing room, but her eyes held that familiar determination he had once admired. "Mitchell is dead," he informed without preamble. "I know," she replied softly. "They'll come for me next, and then for you." "Who are they, Avery? Who's really in control?" She glanced nervously at the security cameras. "You've met some of them, Don. At dinners, fundraisers, board meetings. The DN 457 is just one tool in a much bigger game." "A Blackstone?" "It's bigger than Blackstone," she whispered. "Much bigger. Why do you think we chose you initially? Your reputation, your connections, you were the perfect gateway to the world they wanted to control." Donovan felt a shiver run down his spine. "The envelope I left with Catherine, it contains names," Avery confirmed. "People at the top of the food chain. That's why they're desperate to silence us all." "Why are you telling me this now?" Avery smiled sadly. "Because despite everything, I don't want you to die, Don. And because—" She hesitated. "Because maybe this is my chance to do something right for the first time in a long time." Back at Sterling Tower, Donovan found Catherine analyzing the contents of the famous envelope with a serious expression. "Senators, CEOs, Supreme Court justices," she listed. "The list is a who's who of American power. And all potentially compromised by DN 457, Donovan added. "How do we expose this without becoming targets?" "Maybe we don't need to state it directly," Gloria suggested, entering the room with her laptop. "Biotech records show that DN 457 leaves a unique chemical signature in the blood. If we could require widespread toxicology testing as part of a larger investigation—" "An investigation into corporate corruption," Morrison added, understanding the plan. "Focusing on Blackstone initially, but expanding to include all connected companies and individuals." Donovan watched the city through the window, the lights of Boston twinkling like earthly stars. Somewhere out there, powerful people were planning their next move, determined to maintain their control through a poison that stole not just memories, but the very essence of its victims. "We start tomorrow," he decided, turning to his team. "But tonight, we need to make sure Avery survives to testify." The sun was setting over Boston, casting long shadows across the office. The war was entering its most dangerous phase, and Donovan knew that the next 24 hours would determine not only his future, but the future of an entire system built on lies and chemical manipulation. Avery's transfer to a maximum security federal facility took place overnight in an operation personally coordinated by Morrison. Donovan watched from afar, through security cameras installed in the makeshift command center in the basement of Sterling Tower. 3 Senuelo cars left simultaneously, Catherine reported, monitoring the video feeds. "If someone is watching, they'll have a hard time identifying which one is actually carrying it." Donovan nodded absently, his attention focused on a series of emails recently discovered on Blackstone's server. Correspondence between senior executives revealed a much broader plan than they initially suspected. "Look at this," he called to Gloria, who was analyzing financial records nearby. In 2021, Blackstone secretly acquired a majority stake in Biotech Solutions through a series of shell companies. "And coincidentally," Gloria added, connecting her laptop to the main screen, That's exactly when the first tests of DN457 started showing promising results. Catherine approached, studying the documents. But why would Mitchell sell the operation to someone who already controlled the source of the product? Because he didn't know, a new voice replied. Russell Hammond entered the room, carrying a thick folder. Mitchell was just a pawn in a much bigger game. Donovan had not seen the private investigator since the incident in Providence. Hammond looked older, more tired, but his eyes maintained that characteristic intensity. "What did you find?" Donovan asked, indicating a chair. "Blackstone is just the tip of the iceberg," Hammond explained, spreading documents out on the table. "There's a consortium, a select group of individuals who have been planning this for decades. DN457 is just their latest tool." "For social control," Catherine murmured, understanding. "Judges, politicians, business people, all subtly manipulated to create a perfectly controlled world," Donovan added, feeling a shiver. "And I was part of the plan from the beginning." "His reputation, his influence in the financial market," Hammond confirmed. "You were carefully chosen. Avery was just the means for them to get to you." Morrison's phone rang, interrupting the discussion. The agent listened for a few moments, his face hardening. "The convoy has been attacked," he announced, hanging up. "Professionals. We managed to repel it, but—" "Avery?" Donovan asked, already dreading the answer. "She's alive, but injured. Massachusetts General Hospital." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. While Morrison coordinated security at the hospital, Donovan and Catherine worked on a plan to expose the entire operation. "The biotech files are our best evidence," Catherine argued, organizing documents. "But we need something more impactful, something the media can't ignore." "Maybe I can help with that," Gloria interjected, showing her tablet. "I just got this from a contact at the New York Times. They have a source inside Blackstone, someone willing to talk." Donovan studied the email, his heart racing as he recognized the informant's name. "Elizabeth Carlton, Vice President of Pharmaceutical Development at Blackstone. The same one who oversaw the biotech acquisition," Hammond added. "She knows everything." "Why would she speak now?" "Because," a new voice answered from the door, "some people still have consciences." Elizabeth Carlton stood at the entrance, escorted by 2 FBI agents. She was an elegant, middle-aged woman with grey hair and eyes that carried the weight of many secrets. "When I realized the true extent of the project," she continued, entering the room, "I could no longer participate. DN457 was not about medical treatment or scientific advancement. It was about power, pure and simple." Over the next few hours, Elizabeth detailed the complex web of manipulation and control that stretched across the highest levels of American power. Each revelation was more disturbing than the last, painting a picture of a society subtly controlled by a select group of individuals. "The attack on the convoy was no coincidence," she explained. "They're desperate. With Mitchell dead and Avery willing to talk, the entire scheme is at risk." Donovan watched the city through the window, the first light of dawn beginning to touch the skyscrapers of Boston. Somewhere out there, powerful people were planning their next move, determined to maintain their control at any cost. "How long until the Times story comes out?" he asked Gloria. "Tomorrow, front page. With Elizabeth as the main source and all the documentation we've gathered, it will be impossible to suppress." "Then we have to survive until then," Catherine concluded softly. Morrison entered the room, his face serious. "I just got information from the hospital. Avery has woken up. He's asking to speak to you, Donovan. He says he has one last piece of the puzzle." Massachusetts General Hospital was under tight security when Donovan arrived to visit Avery. Federal agents discreetly occupied strategic positions in each corridor, their presence a silent reminder of the danger that still loomed over everyone involved. "She's stable," reported Dr. Chen, who coincidentally was on duty that night. 2 gunshot wounds, none fatal. He was lucky. Avery was awake when Donovan entered the room, her face pale against the white hospital pillows. For a moment, he was transported back to the day he woke up from his coma, when he found her in Mitchell's arms. How long had it been since then? how much of his life had been built on lies. "You came," she murmured, her voice weak but clear. "I thought after everything." "You said you had information," Donovan interrupted, maintaining emotional distance, "about the consortium." Avery tried to adjust herself on the bed, wincing in pain. DN 457 wasn't their first project. In the 90s, there were similar experiments at Stanford. Different drugs, same goal: behavioral control through chemical manipulation. "Why is this relevant now?" "Because," she hesitated, looking nervously at the door, "because your father was involved, Don. William Sterling didn't die in a car accident in 1995. He found out about the experiments and threatened to expose everything." The revelation hit Donovan like an electric shock. His father, the brilliant neuroscientist whose premature death had shaped his youth, had been silenced by the same group that now sought to destroy him. "How do you know that?" "Mitchell had files," Avery replied, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "When they recruited me at Oxford, they used this information to convince me. They said you would be their next target if I didn't cooperate." Donovan sat heavily in the chair beside the bed, his mind processing the implications. "So, our whole relationship—" "It started as a mission," she added softly. "But it became real to me, Don. The moments we shared, the dreams we had, it wasn't all a lie." Before they could continue, Morrison quickly entered the room. "We have movement. Elizabeth Carlton just received a direct threat. We need to move her to safety." Donovan checked his phone. A message from Catherine flashed on the screen. "Biotech files have been hacked. They're trying to erase evidence." "How long until the Times story?" he asked Morrison. "Less than 12 hours. But we need to keep our sources alive until then." Avery grabbed Donovan's arm as he stood up to leave. "There's one more thing. In the house on Martha's Vineyard, behind the library panel, Mitchell kept a safe. All the original evidence from the Stanford experiments is there." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I understood something when they shot me," she replied, her voice shaking. "Some truths are worth dying for. Your father knew that. Now I know it too." Donovan quickly organized a team to retrieve the documents on Martha's Vineyard, while he himself went with Morrison to protect Elizabeth Carlton. Time was running out, and the invisible enemies that had controlled so many lives for so long were finally showing their claws. Catherine coordinated operations at Sterling Tower, transformed into a state-of-the-art digital bunker. Gloria had discovered attempted intrusions into the company's systems, each one more sophisticated than the last. "They're desperate," Hammond observed, analyzing the attack patterns, "and desperate people make mistakes." Night was advancing over Boston, a storm approaching the horizon. Somewhere in the city, the true masters of the consortium were planning their next moves, as the empire they had built through decades of manipulation and control began to crumble. Donovan watched the city through the bulletproof window of Morrison's car, thinking about his father, about Avery, about all the lives destroyed by limitless ambition. The truth was finally emerging from the shadows, but what would be the ultimate price of its revelation? The answer, he suspected, would be written in blood before the sun rose again over Boston. The storm approaching Boston finally broke, turning the streets into urban rivers as Donovan and Morrison rushed to protect Elizabeth Carlton. The luxury apartment complex where she lived had been turned into a makeshift fortress, with FBI agents strategically positioned at every entrance. "The team on Martha's Vineyard found the safe," Catherine reported through the communicator, "but we are not alone. There is suspicious movement on the property." Donovan tried to ignore the feeling of déjà vu that hit him upon entering Elizabeth's apartment, the same feeling he had moments before the helicopter crash. History repeating itself, but this time he was conscious, alert. "The Stanford documents," Elizabeth said as soon as she saw him, her face tense in the lightning. "Your father. He tried to warn me years ago. I was too young, too ambitious to listen." "Did you meet him?" "William Sterling was my mentor," she admitted, her hands shaking slightly as she poured coffee. "When he discovered the true nature of the experiments, he tried to convince me to help him expose everything. I reported him to the consortium." The revelation hit Donovan like a physical punch. Before he could fully process, his phone vibrated. A message from Gloria. Tower security system compromised. Catherine is evacuating. Break-in attempt in progress. We need to move, Morrison decided, already coordinating with his team. We have a safe location prepared. The sound of breaking glass interrupted his sentence. Gas grenades invaded the apartment through the shattered windows. Morrison pushed Donovan and Elizabeth toward the emergency stairs as chaos ensued. "Catherine," Donovan called over the communicator as they hurriedly descended. "Situation?" "We're safe," she replied, sounds of sirens in the background. "Hammond is with the team on Martha's Vineyard. They found something besides the documents, videos of the original experiments." The rain hit them like icy needles as they emerged into the alley behind the building. Shots echoed overhead, ricocheting off the brick walls. "Don," Avery's voice sounded faintly over his communicator. "They're at the hospital. Dr. Walsh. He wasn't who we thought." "Avery?" "Avery." Just static responded. The next few minutes were a blur of movement and adrenaline. Morrison managed to lead them to an unmarked car, while FBI teams engaged the attackers. "The Times," Elizabeth said as they ran through the city. "We need to make sure the story gets published. It's the only way to end all of this." "Gloria's with the editor-in-chief now," Donovan replied, checking his phone. "The article will air in 3 hours, with or without final approval." A violent impact hit the side of the car. Another vehicle had met them. Morrison struggled to maintain control as they slid down the wet street. "Don," Catherine called over the communicator again, her voice urgent. "The Stanford videos. Your father wasn't just documenting the experiments. He was collecting evidence. There's a list, names of the original consortium members." "Including people still in power today," Elizabeth added, holding on as Morrison made a sharp turn. "Senators, judges, CEOs." The pursuing car hit them again, harder this time. Morrison managed to maneuver into a side street, gaining a few precious seconds. "Massachusetts General Hospital," Donovan decided. "We need to get to Avery." "Don," Morrison began to protest. "She has the last piece," Donovan insisted, "and I won't abandon you again." The storm intensified as they ran through the streets of Boston. On his phone, Donovan watched time tick inexorably toward the moment of publication that would change everything. The hospital was on lockdown when they arrived, but Morrison's badge guaranteed entry. They found Avery's room empty, signs of a struggle evident. "Terrace," Elizabeth pointed to a crumpled paper on the bed. "Walsh." Donovan ran up the stairs, his heart hammering. Rain lashed the terrace when he emerged, finding Dr. Walsh holding Avery close to the edge. "It's over," Donovan announced, inching forward. "The Times publishes in less than an hour. Martha's Vineyard, Stanford, everything." "Nothing ends," Walsh replied, his voice different from the professional persona Donovan had known. "The consortium has existed for decades. We have survived greater threats." "Not this time," Elizabeth emerged from the shadows, her phone held high. "Because this time, we're broadcasting your confession live to the Times." The moment of distraction was enough. Avery managed to free himself, and Morrison, who had positioned himself silently, neutralized Walsh with professional precision. When the sun finally began to rise over Boston, dispelling the storm, Donovan watched the city awaken from his restored office in Sterling Tower. The Times headline flashed across every screen: "Chemical Conspiracy. Decades of Manipulation Exposed." "The first warrants have been issued," Catherine reported, entering the room. "Senators, judges, executives. The House of Cards is collapsing. E. Avery. In federal protection. Your testimony will be essential in the proceedings." Donovan nodded, his mind going back to his father, to the choices that defined not just his life, but generations. The price of truth had been high, but necessary. "What do we do now?" Catherine asked softly. "We rebuilt," he replied, watching the new day dawn. But this time, on real foundations. Sunlight finally broke through the clouds completely, bathing Boston in a golden glow that seemed to wash away the secrets of the past few decades. Somewhere in the city, Avery was beginning his own journey of redemption, while in the nation's halls of power, the empire built on lies and chemical manipulation finally met its end. And Donovan Sterling, the man who woke up from a coma to find his life in ruins, has finally found something more valuable than all his lost memories: the truth.